My session is actually on regenerative agriculture, which is, I believe, the movement that's going to change, make Australia agriculture sustainable. I'm not going to be able to cover it all. If there's any questions or anything I'm saying you want to take issue with or chip in or whatever you want to do, please don't let me rabbit on forever without saying something. Put your hand up and I'll be welcome to answer the questions while we're doing it, okay? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a background to the sustainable agriculture as now practiced at our university. We've got the course, the Bachelor of Sustainable Agriculture, and we're just starting a master's course next year, and all based on making agriculture sustainable. It's an exciting space to be in. I mean, I don't think anybody here is from Hawkesbury, so you won't be familiar with the campus at all. If you do want to move into the agricultural space, there's plenty of room for scientists, social scientists. There's a whole range of topics that you can take up for academic study. It underpins our economy, along with the mining industry, and it's got some difficulties thanks to climate change. And these solutions, you can be part of that solution. So it's not just addressed at the Indian students who maybe have never heard of any of this, but also our students who come over. What I'm going to do is talk about some of our problems of water management, since that was the theme of yesterday, and I'll look at how we might go about some solutions for those. My talk's going to be particularly on technology, but there's a whole range of things. I'm going to set the bar onto the high end, perhaps. What we're really interested, though, we have high-end solutions. We want to make answers that are relevant to farmers, that people can do at a lower technology. So we'll set although we'll talk about high-end technology throughout this talk, what we're always aiming at is coming at answers to the farmers, what the farmers really need, rather than what the technology is capable of providing. Okay, now our aim is from cell to system. We cover the cell biology of plants and animals, and we then bring that up to the system level. And that's our aim throughout the research that I'm conducting at the moment. We're looking at a lot of cell biology, which is a rapid learning curve for me. And then we want to look at that and how we can move away from the cell to the whole system and take the signal that we get from the cell up to the system level. There are three aspects to it. There's the protected cropping is a particular emphasis for us, and something we wasn't spoken about yesterday, but a thing that we think will help to manage water in particular against climate change. We'll have a look at that later. We've got our education programs, and we also have sustainable production. Mostly our enterprise is a cattle enterprise. It's greatly improved in the last few years, and now we have this stud cattle farm on the farm. This is the greenhouse that we have on the campus, and our aim is to push those limits, at increasing the quality of the food. I don't know whether the Australian students will be well familiar of going to Woolworths, seeing beautifully ripe peach or nectarine and trying to eat it when you get home and it tastes like a piece of wood that you've bought. Well, our aim is now to try, we have a big movement in Australia. Our supply chain is controlled basically by three large supermarkets, and they control the marketing of most of our produce. Unfortunately, they want to pick it as early as possible. They make it look ripe and it tastes terrible. So we want to put nutrient density back into the food to make, it tastes better, but also it will be more healthy. We've got we're building some new greenhouses in the near future, and we want to integrate solar technology into those. We're also looking at small-scale marketing in conjunction with Hawkesbury Harvest and a local restaurateur who set up you may see on Channel 7 late at night, talking about Hawkesbury produce. Okay, Now, our particular challenges on our farm are that we're sitting on an alluvial clay pan. It's on a bend in the Hawkesbury River. We're in the northwest of Sydney, for those of you who don't know Australia, but think of Sydney and then think of the northwest. Just under the mountains, at the very limit of the Cumberland Plain. We're on a bend in the river, which means we've got a lot of compact clay. Australia is very low in carbon in its agriculture. It's a very old continent, and most of the carbon of the topsoil disappeared millennia ago. So we have, every time you see a dust cloud coming over the mountains, and you think, oh, the air quality's down. Yeah, that's also a few million tons of topsoil which is disappearing off towards New Zealand. Our carbon levels are extremely low, and so one of the focuses we're looking at is increasing soil carbon. Australia as a whole is extremely low in phosphates too. The soils have lost all of their phosphate. And the thing we're trying to do now is trying to increase our use of recycled water without increasing the heavy metal content of the soils, particularly things like the build-up of cadmium from us increasing the acidicity of the soils. Just as a background, there's probably no need to show this after yesterday's talks, but we've entered into a period of extreme climate extremes, where we seem to be going through periods of much more extreme drought, followed by much inundation. We're getting flood inundation, which also takes off the topsoil. So we need new strategies. Australia needs new strategies for water management. Put simply, we're not going to be able to continue to farm on the scale that we are without managing water better. So here is our campus, and I've got a map which actually shows the farm on it. So most of this area, we have a horticultural precinct up here. Most of this is, we've got a lot of remnant Cumberland Plain bushland, which is used for by the Institute of the Environment. The rest of it is agricultural land for pasture. Okay? So we have a cattle herd and deer and sheep. The way that's managed is through 3 water sources. They centre on these dams which we have around the campus and the wetlands for the recycling, which is up here. And one big feature that we have, which is better than most places, we have a water treatment plant which we have to use the water from. So the water from the Richmond town up at the top is recycled in here and then enters which dam? This one up here. And then is used for the irrigation of the land. Now, unfortunately, although that seems great, we've got tons of water, so much water that we throw it around even in the middle of the day. But managing it is extremely difficult because of the restrictions that we have on what we can use those different types of water for. Unfortunately, let's see where we go. So we've got our 3 water sources. The town water, the potable water, which comes from the tap, which is of a quality that you can drink. We have stormwater runoff, which we collect. I'll go back to the previous slide. The stormwater runoff is collected in this area here, and we can use that as one resource. Unfortunately, it hasn't rained for a bit. And then we have the recycled water from the recycled water treatment plant. Now, using those is a real balancing act. I hadn't realised until I spoke to our managers just how difficult that is to manage. The first thing is that we could use the potable water. Now we try and minimise that. Unfortunately, due to the restrictions on the usage of water, we still have to use potable water for irrigation, for much of our irrigation. And we're not alone in that. Most of the horticulturalists in Western Sydney who are producing, I think it's 25% of the food, the gross fruit and vegetable, fresh produce for Western Sydney are using potable water as their source water for irrigation. even in this high-tech greenhouse situation we've got here, no greenhouse in the campus. And the reason for that is that we're not allowed to use the other types of water which we might want to. We can. Oops. The problem too is that when we use the water for irrigation, now it's nutrient rich, and that then goes into the drains and creates a problem of the blue-green algae build-up. There, don't know whether you know, but you guys from India won't know, but up in Gaira, the Costa has now put in 20-hectare greenhouses, but there are already problems with the effluent that is coming out of those greenhouses that's going into the streams. It's got so much nitrate in it that it's creating problems with blue-green algae, particularly in times of drought. So we've got, the way we're using water, potable water for irrigation in protected cropping is not great at the moment. We're starting some projects. The Professor of Agriculture at Hawkesbury is starting a project to see if we can then use this to grow useful algae before the water gets put out into the drains. Stormwater can be used for horticulture, both for citrus. We use it on the citrus, but we also can use it on vegetables and root crops, which is not the same as the recycled water. Unfortunately, with the shortage of rain, we don't have a lot of runoff at the moment, so we are in a bind where we've only really got two types of water that we can be using. One, the potable water, and that's what's forcing us to use the potable water in the irrigation, in the greenhouses. Because the recycled water is completely restricted to pasture. We do spray it around, as I said, we do irrigate it at weird times of day from this central pivot. But the water, we can only use it on pasture. You can't use it on root crops, and you can't use it on horticultural crops. There are areas of Sydney that do have sewage treatment plants which take it one stage further, and you can use that water for watering your gardens. But it gets really ridiculous because we've got teaching resources that we would like to irrigate, which nobody's going to eat, but we can't spray it because the areas we have on the campus don't have fences. There's all kinds of restrictions on its use. And the problem is that having no fences means that it's actually classified as a park. And you can't use recycled water in a park, for instance. So our restrictions on water reuse are extremely onerous on us. At the moment, we're operating on stage 1 restrictions, which means that nobody can spray water all over their drive to get the leaves off it. Why you would want to do that in the first place, I have no idea. But that's been banned. We have exemptions for the use of potable water at the moment for certain types of irrigation, but the next stage, all of our irrigation is going to have to be done with watering cans, it looks like. So that will be interesting. Okay, now I want to look at another way of looking at this. This is about to rethink. I think it's time and the kind of broad-based conversations that are going on in this room. We need to rethink, and it's not me rethinking it, it's a movement within Australian agriculture to rethink the way we go about it. Since white settlement, we've used a European model for all of our agriculture, where we are mineral deficient, say in phosphorus, well, we throw superphosphate around. The Hawkesbury farm has been farmed continually for about 130 years. It's one of the worst pieces of agricultural land. The old saying was from the college, if you could farm this, you could farm anything. Some of the topsoil is extremely thin. We sit on a clay layer which may be a few metres deep. Where they wanted to grow a new crop or demonstrate a crop in the old days, they would just throw superphosphate around. And we have huge areas because phosphorus is not very mobile, we have huge areas of the farm which are now contaminated with huge amounts of phosphorus. One of the things we have to deal with. So potassium is also added in huge amounts, but that's more mobile, so represents less of a problem now. But in terms of our native fauna, and we do have one of the last bits of remnant Cumberland Plain bushland on the campus, this is creating a problem because Australian flora has evolved to grow without phosphorus and to accumulate very little phosphorus. So in fact what we're doing by throwing this phosphate around, we've killed off large amounts of the native fauna. We've also used bucket loads of glyphosate as a herbicide to prepare new crops, and we've added massive amounts of ammonium nitrate. The other thing in Australian agriculture, the philosophy has been to use these inputs to maximise the amount of stock we can put onto a paddock. So our stocking rates have been always at their maximum, and despite the risk that that entails, as people all over the north of New South Wales are finding at the moment, where they can't sell a cow to save their life. Nobody is buying our cows as new stock because nobody's buying stock at the moment. So stocking to the land's limits has always been the philosophy. Now this regenerative agriculture, which I'm trying to get up to in a bit, throws all that out the window. And what we're going to say is that we want to go to systems which lower the amount of phosphate, try and get rid of the glyphosate usage, and get rid of the addition of nitrate as much as we can. Okay, so one thing that we've got, one possible solution, is what we call precision agriculture. And the idea of that is to lower the inputs, in terms of water in particular, by only dosing to the amount that you actually require. Instead of flood irrigating or irrigating at a certain time of day, or because you know that's what produced your crop last year, to actually use measurement devices to decide how much water do you need, and do you need it over the whole of the field. Oops. So what is precision ag? Well, it is a rapidly growing area. There is supposed to be, it's a bit, depending who you talk to, they will talk about a revolution in the use of precision agriculture. I usually hear that from companies trying to sell you software. But there is definitely a movement, and if we talked about precision agriculture 10 years ago, the old guys would just laugh at you. But now, gradually many of the better ones are picking it up and starting to show that it makes a difference. It's driven by capture technology and things like computers and the sensor technology and different chemical spectroscopy that we can use. Tie that to a GIS system, the Geographical Information System, and the processing technology that's improved, and you get a system where you can measure what is happening not at the paddock level or at the enterprise level, but actually in specific areas of the farm. The latest satellites are down to about 1.5 meters, and means that you can then start to provide the needs to that part of the paddock to its device. You know, if you don't need to irrigate one part of the paddock, you just don't. You irrigate as you need it to within the paddock. The other great movement is into robotics. One of the big problems we have in Australian agriculture is labour. There's simply not enough labour for the amount for our produce. And so there's a big push, particularly within the horticultural industry, to turn many of the tasks over to robotics if they can be done. So things like pollination and picking, people devising ingenious robots, but not also, the Sydney University have now developed a robot which will go across the land and it will detect particular weeds in particular positions and just spray that weed. So if we're using glyphosate, it will only go onto the particular plant that requires the glyphosate instead of spreading it across the whole field. The nice thing about that is that they've now downgraded the technology, and so they're stripping their detectors out of old Sony PlayStations. And so they can start to, instead of having to go for high-end technology to produce this, they're producing it from parts which are readily available. And you know, there's a lot of the farmers have got sons who are usually computer scientists who are picking up on this stuff. So simple technology, and now a big move is into the use of phone apps so that you can get the information on pests, disease, irrigation needs, weather needs onto your phone. And we have a program, I think, in Sri Lanka from the university in looking at phone apps for pests and disease. Okay, now GPS has got much better. We're just about to go to the point where we can put a GPS on a cow and detect where it is. Well, you can do it now, but you'll only know where the cow is to about 20 metres, which is not great if you're trying to look at animal husbandry using GPS. But the new collars that are about to come on the market will enable us to start to look at the animal level interactions and start to pick out which are the best cows, which ones are the best ones for breeding, by looking at the movements of the cows. The big harvesters all work off positioning. Many of them can be operated unmanned, but are not allowed to be in case they go mad and just keep going. So the technology exists for them to be used automatically. You do have to have a person in the cow pen. The other thing that has happened is that in the harvesters is that they have spectrometers inside them which can detect the yield. So we have yield detection at the in the cider. So as it comes up the belt, we have a spectrophotometer working there, working out what is the yield that we're getting from different parts of the farm. Now, with the spatial information that gives us, we're able now to work out which parts of the paddock are giving the highest yields, which is really cool. But how do we make use of that is the big thing. Oil and protein measurement can be done the same. We can measure the protein and oil measurements. We can do mass balances on the harvester and then detect which parts of that field might require fertilizer, high levels of fertilizer, and we can start to balance, do the mass balance of how much do we actually need to apply if we want to reduce our fertilizer load. So we can do it now on paddock level. And that technology has been around for a while, and it's been mostly used by the grain growers. What we're trying to do at the university is trying to bring that down to the small scale, so that we can use it in the low tech and in an understandable way, which can be used for small farmers. When we talk to the ag tech people, most of them are not interested in small farmers at all. In fact, they'll say, oh, this is going to be a vehicle where the small farmer will go out of business. Well, it's never going to happen. They'll just ignore the technology. But it is a bit of a shame because there are still a vast number of enterprises which are family farms. So the base level for what we need to be doing works on electrical conductivity. And we can measure that by driving an electromagnetic device over the surface, and that will give us the moisture content, the salinity, soil type, and the amount of capacity for cation exchange within that soil. So that's our first level. We've got the local farmers around the Hawkesbury are starting to use that to work out. The carrot growers have just done a survey of working out which parts of their paddock are producing the lowest yields and trying to balance that up by doing electrical conductivity measures. The next step, which I haven't got a slide on, is to put soil moisture probes in. And we put those in at various depths in the soil, and then we can work out the irrigation needs based on the actual amount that's required to reach a certain relative humidity in the soil. So we have, one of the things I've got to do when I'm going to get back is install 29 soil moisture probes on the campus. Just got those. What we can do then is relate that to sources of heavy metal contaminants by measuring the amount of radioactive isotopes that are coming off. So we can measure with an isotope detector, we can measure things like potassium levels above ground, and we can detect weak gamma rays that come off those various elements of the periodic table. We can also do it, you can do it, I've ANSTO, that's our nuclear science department, came up to the campus and they did run a neutron activation machine, the mobile one, which fires gamma rays into the ground, fires neutrons into the ground and creates radioactive isotopes. I don't know how that, if it was anybody but ANSTO, I'm not sure we'd be allowed to do it, but let's see, making radioactive isotopes may not be. It's on the cards for the future. Okay, and from that we can detect the soil texture type, the soil water, storage water capacity, degrees of water logging, and we can measure the rooting depths from these measurements. We can also then relate that back to working out what is our soil type. This one is from one of the local growers, one of the local carrot growers. Putting these maps together from the EM38, which is the electromagnetic survey, the radiometric potassium levels, the radiometric thorium levels, and then we get the total radiometric count, and then we can make that and work out which soil types we have across the paddock. We've got a whole range of new technologies come available for measuring plants, plant growth and yields. And again, I think Australia's leading the field in this kind of work through the phenotyping lab, which is down in Adelaide, which you ever get a chance to go to, go. It's fantastic. They're taking in different wheat types, and they can do experiments on such a vast scale, and they take the pots on a conveyor belt and sense it every day and measure the growth. But we can also use 3D imaging from drones to measure that. Now finally, we've got a use for drones. Every farmer virtually has gone and bought themselves one because there was so much in the news. And then you find the flight restrictions, 120 feet, and the fact that you have to maintain line of sight with it means that it's not that useful. So most of them are just sitting in the shed. But with the LiDAR, which is the lights, like a radar but using a light, using a laser, we may finally be moving towards a usage of them. The only use I've heard of useful, where farmers have claimed that drones are particularly good, is the Queensland farmers use them to drive feral pigs towards the guns. When I've spoken to them, they said, it would be good if we could mount the gun on the drone. I said, yeah, but that's not a drone anymore, it's a helicopter gunship. Anyway, we can now plant and plot the growth rate through here. Now, what we're trying to do when we do this is move away from physiological mechanistic models of plant growth. So we got a model, say, for a particular crop of wheat, and we could produce the mathematical equations for that under various stresses. And there is a very good program that CSIRO produced called APSIM, which does that approach. But the approach now is to move away from that and say, okay, this is your crop, this is your field. I don't want to know what's underneath it so much. I want to know what yield will it produce with certain inputs, with particular inputs. And move away from that. So I'm saying, I need to know what every wheat crop will do under each particular stress. But saying this, you come down to your local scale, measure your field and say, okay, this is the growth rate within your field. And this is what you need to maintain the optimum growth. The other thing that we're using on the campus, something I'm involved in, is in hyperspectral imaging, which can also be put onto the drones. So when we move away from the cell and the leaf level, we want then to take that data and see how that relates to the kind of information that you can pull from a drone or a satellite. And probably for India, India's just put up this new satellite into space, which is capable of producing hyperspectral imaging. One of the projects I think that the university is trying to get off the ground is a collaboration to use that for agricultural information. So we take hyperspectral means it's outside of the visible spectrum. So we're taking information from the near infrared and from the UV and using that information as a message for plant stress. So the information, project I'm particularly involved in is on canola or oilseed rape, and looking to see if the fluorescence markers which we know exist in the UV if they can be then, we can see that under the confocal microscope, we see it in the chemistry lab, can we move that up so that we could use either a handheld meter onto the plant, or can we move it up to the level above and do a whole field approach? And there's a couple of really good papers looking at stress and disease in olives, I think, measured from doing that approach, taking it from the cell level up to the high level. Now, the big problem is here, it's very easy with the new technology to capture these images, but the problem is that most of the average farmers have no idea what they mean. And any day of the week, you will get a salesperson will come in with what they call the Internet of Things, and they will offer you a solution. But that solution is probably far more than that farmer will ever need in terms of information. And so one of the things that's putting them off is they're buying $30,000 computer systems to solve a $3,000 problem, which may involve something as simple as turning a valve on a tap. So what we need to do is a whole program. That's why the education program comes in. We're looking to educate people into what information is required to optimize their yields and reduce water usage, reduce pesticide usage, reduce nutrient additions. We've got a whole series of indices that we can measure. I won't bore you with them, but these are the various indices, that's in a fraction of them, which tell you particular things that are happening in the plant. So a plant physiologist has done an experiment and seen that you get an increase, say, in UV or infrared at particular absorbance, and then that's related back to an index which you can use at the level of a drone or a satellite. The normalised, the NDVI is the most popular one at the moment. That's relatively simple, and many agronomists, that data is available for free in Australia, so farmers are making great use of it. But there are many other indices that they could be using. Now, let's have a quick look at this case study, because I've said that the problem is in uptake. And this is a local example from just north of Richmond, a place called Arcadia, where there is a horticultural, floriculture nursery run by somebody called Sonia Cameron, and she ran this nursery for years. They've got all sorts of pressure. There's a lot of pressure in Western Sydney, comes from land prices, and the whole around Arcadia, which was prime horticultural land, has now become housing. Many of those people don't like the horticulturalists still being there because they worry about the effluent that they're putting into the water. They also had problems. She got wiped out twice by frost and twice by hail. So we have massive hailstorms in Sydney, and we also have drought problems. So it becomes difficult when you're running a floriculture business when 30% up to 30 or more % of your crop, and in a good year, 30% of your crop goes to wastage. So you're producing, you can't then market to one of the big distributors like Bunnings, which is one of our hardware stores, because you have to guarantee a contract price at the beginning, and you have to supply that, come what may. If your farm, you contract for 100,000 plants, you can only supply 70, you have to buy the other 30,000, the other percentage from somebody else in order to meet your contract. So it becomes very difficult for these small suppliers to actually market their products. She changed that with precision agriculture. What she did, she introduced a series of sensors for pH, conductivity, soil moisture, rainfall, soil temperature, and they link them all to an automated irrigation system. It's done on a very small scale. For the large, you can see the limit of the property. And it changed their lives completely. First time they could take a holiday for 25 years was when they introduced this technology, because they could sit in Germany, look at the iPad and see what was happening on the farm, and if they saw a soil moisture probe giving an anomalous reading, ring up the daughter, and it turned out the plant pot with the sensor in that tipped over. So there wasn't actually an issue, but they could monitor things from a distance on their iPad or on their phone. The things that we can monitor, we measure dissolved oxygen, the redox potential, we can measure the leaf wetness, the transpiration rate, the soil temperature, water storage levels on the property, which they turned into a wholly recycled system, conductivity I mentioned here before, relative humidity in the rainfall. And they're able through that to achieve 95% consistency in the product that they're producing. So as I said, it changed their lives, both and their business, because now they are able to contract with a guaranteeing that they can supply. So the wastage has gone down, and suddenly they've start to make some money out of it. The biggest advantage is the reduced wastage, producing for guaranteed markets, increased turnaround times. So they can manage microclimates on their own property in protected cropping. And the next thing they want to do is to bring in robotics, because obviously they have a problem, like everybody in Australia has, with getting skilled labour. In Sydney, we're on the west of Sydney, we're on the fringe. The big problem we have is that the agricultural land, which produces 25% of the produce required for Sydney population to eat, is rapidly disappearing under housing estates, because the land price is driving demand for new properties. The property prices keep rising, and the farmers are able only to keep going, many of them, because they can get loans from the bank, because the land value keeps going up. So the big thing, Sydney is about to get a new airport up in very close to where the university is, and that land around the airport, as far as possible, they want to keep a large tracts of it free from housing. They don't want to put houses directly underneath the flight paths, and so protected cropping is seen as the answer to that, both in terms of supply of high quality produce, which is contaminant free. With our greenhouse at the campus, we don't use pesticides. We can get rid of all additives, we can produce high quality products, and we can produce them on a scale which is not possible just from planting outdoors. Now the scale, we have a high-tech greenhouse, which I may have a slide on here. This is our state-of-the-art greenhouse at the campus. Now this costs $10 million to install, so it's far too expensive for most producers. We got a grant for it, so that was all right. But this is the kind of technology that they're using in Europe, particularly in the Netherlands, to produce high-quality products. They've also started, and one of the things that may happen around Sydney is they want to put this on an industrial scale to produce produce which they can guarantee goes on the planes and it's not going to be transferring contaminants or pests to another country. So they've just installed one of those at JFK Airport. I think it's run by Amazon, just outside New York's airport. There is talk of one coming onto the campus, but it's one of the things that this kind of greenhouse is what Costa has put up in Guyra. The problem with them is that when the infrastructure is so expensive, the only thing you can do inside it is chase yield. So all of the other things that we're interested in, nutrient-rich, get it to taste better, do away with some of the post-harvest treatments, not possible when you're having to pay back the expenditure on a massively expensive greenhouse. So one of the things we've been looking at around Western Sydney are the growers which have picked up on these kind of technologies and the computerisation and control, but doing it themselves in the back garden with bits they bought from Bunnings, pumps and stuff like that. And it's amazing what you can achieve with low-tech protected cropping to increase yields, increase profits, and reduce the water usage. I haven't got time to talk about that today, but I saw some amazing bodge jobs around Western Sydney. The kind of things we're looking at is we have sunshine detectors, radiometers and quantum sensors for different types of light measurements. We've put those in at the top of the canopy inside here, so they grow above the plants, and we measure the sunshine sensor. What we're interested in is harnessing only, or using only the photosynthetically active radiation. It's the actual part of the light spectrum that the plant needs is actually much narrower than the visible spectrum. And so some of that heat, particularly from the UV, the high energy stuff, can be harvested off and used as solar power. So we have light coming in, and we're harvesting out around 45% of the UV, the yellow and blue, is taken out and then used to produce electricity. That's the aim. There are a few side effects. It seems to stress the plants and make them grow bigger leaves, but not necessarily bigger fruit. So it's growing things. If you want like leafy greens, this is great for that. If you want to grow eggplants, not so good, it doesn't produce so many. The other problem we've got trying to deal with at the campus is that is pollination. And so we're using, inside that greenhouse, we use native stingless bees as pollinators to try and get over the problem of having to get the vast amount of labour to go in every day and shake the bush to pollinate the plant. Bees are much more efficient at doing it. Native bees are not proving that cooperative in doing it. But unfortunately, we have bumblebees are banned in Australia. They do exist in Tasmania. Somebody brought one in and it's got released. But they don't want to let anybody use them, so they're banned from use inside greenhouses, even though they are now present. The argument being that they'll have pests on them, and once they're used in a greenhouse, everybody will want them. So they're currently banned. So we can either use honeybees inside the greenhouse, with the problems of people getting stung. But that doesn't seem to be much of a problem to me. I just think we could just turn the temperature around and they'll all head back to the hive anyway. So I don't know why we can't use honeybees, but we're using native stingless bees. Okay, now finally, I just want to go through our pasture management solutions that we're using on the campus and how we're trying to get that to help with managing resources. And this brings us to what we're calling regenerative agriculture. So instead of stocking to the maximum amount on our campus that we can, what we're doing is stocking to the rates that the land can sustain over a year. And all our strategies for dealing with that involve managing the pasture and managing the irrigation so that we don't have to add huge amounts of glyphosate, we don't have to use huge amounts of nutrients. Try and get the system to produce its own nutrients and only stock to that rate. Now, as I said, people 10 years ago would have thought that was a joke. But many of these practices are actually common in Australian agriculture now by the most hardened skeptics of their value. One thing that we're doing in terms of determining irrigation needs, we've moved to a system on the campus which we're trialing of artificial intelligence. So we get half-hourly weather data from a thing called the Weather Company. I can't remember the one who runs that. And then we put it through the Microsoft Azure artificial intelligence system to try and give us predictions, 7-day forecasting or better, of local weather conditions of whether we're going to get rain. So if that's possible, then we would be able to say, okay, we don't need to irrigate tomorrow, we can wait for the rain, which we know there's a 50% chance of coming in 5 days' time. What we do is we train the system on the difference between the farm where we are and the local meteorological station, which actually is next door. And we'll train the system up to give us a predictive model. Now, we're still in the evaluation stage of that because since we bought it, it's hardly ever rained. So the predictions are very good. I can predict for the next 7 days it's not going to rain. But I can do that without the artificial intelligence. We'd like a period of unpredictable weather in order to train the system a bit better. What we get is then a series of patterns, and what we do through our data science is to analyse those patterns and see if we can fit a predictive pattern to them. And it's claimed by the supplier that in periods of bringing that data together, we work out which parts of the data are significant, and then which can be redundant, and then produce our prediction of how much rain we're going to get based on patterns localised to our particular farm. What we've changed is the irrigation systems. We've gone to what's called variable rate, where instead of irrigating the length of that spigot, we have valves on each particular sprayer. So we can now, where we know there's a patch of the electromagnetic survey tells us we need extra water, we can supply water to that particular part of the paddock. And I went down to Tasmania, and the guys down there are using that. They have the opposite problem from the rest of Australia. They've got too much water. But it enables us to aim our water resource management and reduce the amount of water irrigation, not now flooding the field with excess water, particularly in areas which might be low, where all the water drains to. There's no point irrigating that low area where you want to concentrate the water at the top. We've changed our stocking rates, and in a regenerative system, what you do is you put them on and you just keep moving them. You don't allow the cattle or the stock to eat the field out, so it takes a long time for it to regenerate. So you'll put it on, and they'll go and spread manure over that. We put a huge stock load on that particular paddock, and then take it off before they've done too much damage to it. So that means the land recovers much more quickly. The other thing, and the thing that's been the biggest change in Australian agriculture at the moment, is that most people have moved as far as they can to zero tillage. So instead of turning the soil over and then losing oil, soil moisture, we've gone to lifting the soil and shoving any seed underneath it if we can, and then putting it back down again, which has made a massive difference. The water losses are so much less. The other thing is we intercrop as much. We don't do rotations anymore. We've gone to intercropping as far as possible, and we put things in like canola, which have natural biofumigants inside them. They are toxic to many insects. If you look at canola, although you get covered with cabbage white butterflies, cabbage white moths, you'll also see that the roots, many of them, if you plant canola or Brussels sprouts and things like that, any brassicas, weeds don't grow around them because they release natural toxins to most fungi and bacteria. So intercropping with these things, and also intercropping so that we can have a paddock which is not going to die off at a particular season. So we've got on our fields, we intercrop with 3 varieties, winter oats, types of grass, so that we get a continual yield of grass and fodder for the cattle. So in this drought, we do have the backup of the recycled water, but we haven't, our cattle are actually overfed at the moment. The other thing we've been doing is planting lucerne to break up the clay. The roots on lucerne, and they'll force themselves through the clay and gradually break it up. When we crop, if we do kill a crop off by cropping it, we want to use the roots to increase the soil carbon. And the big change that's happening now, and big possibilities for farmers, if they would come on board with the idea that it's a good idea to reduce carbon emissions in the atmosphere, is that it's on a vast scale. Plants photosynthesizing in crops are drawing in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and using it to produce plant growth. So we have massive amounts of carbon, possibly, if we don't kill it off, in the roots, because our carbon content is extremely low on some of our paddocks, but it's shown on a few episodes of Landline which I've watched that you can very quickly, over a 5-year period, get it from about 2% up to 12%. It's 12% carbon. And once you do that, your ground will then retain water much better. The water losses, if you're doing zero tillage, will be much better. If you're stocking without having to add glyphosate, reducing your inputs, yes, you're getting less amount of money because you don't have such a big herd, but your profit margins are much bigger because you're not putting so many inputs into the soil. The other thing is that we can massively increase the biodiversity and we're not killing off the native fauna. It makes so much sense, you think, why the hell hasn't somebody thought of it before? Our vision for water use, just to finish off, is that we will be increasing the soil carbon content. We want to move into protected cropping to produce nutrient-dense fruit and vegetables. We're using agrometrics for precision agriculture, and as I said, we've changed our irrigation practice massively, and the farm looks great. We've got a new project starting vertical farming in the near future. It hasn't started yet, we're still negotiating, but where we put stack the vegetables up and put them on a rotating bench. Retractable roofs, well, apart from anything else, apart from cutting out the excess sunlight, they also protect the crops from hail. You can produce huge amounts of increases in yields even by a simple system of a polytunnel. You don't need something like these high-tech greenhouses. That one's not actually ours. But we can go to medium tech, which are those ones are ours. And we're producing huge amounts of produce, which currently we give to the food banks. If we can do new varietal trials, we're trying to produce premium quality. The thing, if you're going to go into protected cropping, you want to value add. Okay, there's no point growing. One of the issues we have with our current greenhouses, we're growing eggplants. Nobody makes any money out of eggplants because the market is oversupplied and controlled by Woolworths. What we're trying to do is then looking at things like microgreens, but here is Chinese medicinal herbs. Big move into trying to produce medicinal herbs because they're high value. If you're going to go to protected cropping, you need to aim your crops at something which is going to make you money. Too many of the horticulturalists in our country make their money because somebody else has a cyclone or a disaster. And in the interim years where everybody's doing okay, nobody's making any cash. So the periods of, we'll move away from that, choosing crops which are going to produce high value products, which are pesticide free, nutrient rich, and large value adding that process is what we're after. So what we've got is we're moving towards, well, we've got stormwater harvesting, which is great. We've used the recycled water. We are trying to lobby to try and get them to extend the usage of recycled water because it is a travesty in Australia, with its the driest continent on Earth, that the water is a single use and then goes straight into the river without being able to be used. We're so restricted on what we can use the water for at the moment. We're using our constructed wetlands for the stormwater runoff to run through, and that would possibly be used on our commercial greenhouse, which is coming soon. We're planning the vegetation better, as I said, choosing crops, choosing intercropping, which will produce year-round yields for pasture. We're using minimum tillage. As far as possible, we use zero tillage and gone to organic fertilisers. We're trying to increase, our big push is to try and increase the soil carbon because we see that key not only for mitigating carbon dioxide emissions, anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions, but also for improving the soil health. And a vast change is possible with relatively little effort. If you stop tilling, it's saving you a fortune in ploughing the fields. Measuring the soil water balances, moving our centre pivot irrigators onto variable rates, using a mixed pasture ecology. We don't have monocrops anymore, and we're trying to conserve as much of our fodder. In terms of our breeding, I'll leave that We've set up a series of living labs, is the jargon that we use. So they've got the Environmental Institute, which is looking at carbon dioxide exchange, the farm, the water recycling scheme, the high-tech greenhouse, and we also have a river farm which is used by the local land services of the Department of Agriculture for exhibitions for education for small farmers on the street. We've got a new breeding program, we've put the sensors in and we're operating precision agriculture. We're moving to medicinal herbs and promoting plants in vertical farming. We're using some of the land for pastoral demonstrations, though those are a bit intermittent at the moment. There's the wireless communications, cattle ID growth. As I said, we want to be measuring animal interactions using GPS flags. So things look pretty good, and that's pretty much where we are. Some of that technology hopefully will come on next year, but some of it's already established, and that's where we're heading. I think if we do rethink Australian agriculture and make it regenerative, forget this chasing yield all the time. Unfortunately, with the expensive greenhouse, that's extremely difficult. But on low-tech levels, stop chasing yield and start to think about the production, what we're putting in. If you put in less, can you still produce a viable crop with less input? It's been shown with the cattle industry, you can make cattle zero carbon neutral, if you adopt regenerative practices. Okay, I think that's me, isn't it? Okay, Oh, because they're worried. The Sydney Water is extremely risk averse. Okay, and they're scared stiff. Now, if they were in Europe, it wouldn't be a question. They would do the next stage of water recycling, which we don't have, and water in London has been drunk 3 times by the time you get it in London. But we're not at that stage. We throw all our water, single use, straight down into the drains.
Is it coming from like sewage? Where's the recycled water?
Oh, it comes from Richmond. Yeah, it's sewage and it's bath water, anything. All water. It goes through the sewage treatment plant. The problem we have with it at the moment, because we don't do the final stage, Sydney Water puts the pH up in order to drop all the minerals out of it, as many as they can, which makes it high pH. And so we've got very high sodic capacity, we've got very high salinity in our soils. Nitrate is difficult to get rid of, but they do have a nitrate reduction system. They have a phosphate reduction system on it too. Yeah. None of it makes any sense, particularly the bit where we can't spray it on citrus. You can't use it. We can't even spray it around because there's no fence which separates the area we wish to irrigate, and therefore it's classified as a public park, and you're not allowed to use recycled water in a public park. Makes no sense.
I was just going to ask, do you look at the type of crops themselves and how they develop the crop, and therefore how much water the actual crop needs?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're aiming to do. We were trying to get what growth rates are you getting for what input. I'm trying to reduce that input so you can get only putting in the optimum amount of water that's required to get the yield.
They do a lot of playing around, don't they, with coming up with new crops that are better drought resistant.
More drought resistant varieties. Yeah, we're growing drought resistant canola at the moment. I'm not sure why it's drought resistant, but it's pretty resistant.
And where does that tip over? Because I don't really know, into genetically modified or not?
That's a very, very good question. You try, and the question's about whether we're using GMs or not. No, we're not. This is natural strains that you pick out a naturally occurring strain.
Yeah.
That's not classed as genetic modification. So we're not inserting or we're not snipping bits of the DNA out. We're using mutants from existing mutants and then selecting them.
How you permit your carbon availability in your soil?
Pardon?
Your carbon availability in your soil. So
Yeah.
how you permit this?
How we're measuring it?
Yeah.
We're literally taking soil samples and burning them
Yeah,
in an
and
oven.
this is done, there's a lots of deficient carbon soil. Yeah. So
Pardon?
deficient carbon soil is there now. So
How do you introduce carbon?
Oh, into carbon, leave the roots in.
yeah.
Leave it, just leave the root build up. Use plant pulses and things with what do you call them, mycorrhizal fungi to increase the nitrogen content, so that they actually produce more nitrogen than they take in. So they put nitrogen into the soil. So we're growing things like beans, intercropping with those, and leaving the roots in. Don't till. Just let the plant die off in the ground and the carbon content will go up.
You have taken out the vegetation index. So it is specifically for the agricultural land only.
You can use it for anything. It measures the amount of nitrogen in the plant.
Just
So,
suppose it is based on your GIS Google mapping or something.
yes,
That you have taken through
it's
GIS.
what we're taking is the NDVI is the red light minus the near infrared light divided by 2 added together.
But suppose the vegetation is there, do you agree that the vegetation is some important species or some other species which is weeds or like that? And
It doesn't make any distinction because what it's measuring is nitrogen content. It's not specific to a crop, it's measuring purely nitrogen content. So it's measured nitrogen inside the, I've forgotten the model, but it's in that way.
in your presentation, can you tell me what is the percentage of the area which is covering the alkaline or the looser soil in your country?
Can I tell
The
you?
alkaline soil.
Alkaline soil?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you, but I know what our soil is particularly alkaline because we're using recycled water, because the last stage of the sewage treatment at the moment involves raising the pH. So ours is extremely too high. We would love to take it down.
Because in our UP, we are facing this looser or the alkaline soil problem in our UP.
We are generating an
Yeah.
alkaline soil problem. If we had another, I would love Sydney Water to put another stage onto their water treatment plant so that we wouldn't have this problem. But because they're not making, they don't require that because the recycled water can't be used for drinking. So they don't care. As long as it's clean, it's got rid of the coliforms, it's got rid of all of the nutrients, it's got rid of the toxins. They don't take it to the stage where it's really making agriculture use. So one of the things we have to monitor is what's the effect of putting this high alkaline water onto our land.
And
Because it's not a certain value.
and your presentation was related to mainly with water, the recycling of the water. But what about the weather system over there? Is the impact of weather also on the seasonal crops or like that?
Yeah, they're having
Predictions, you are having that problem.
Yeah, we're having a huge one. Because of the length of the period of drought and the severity of the drought, and then when the rains come, it's much more severe. So we're getting flooding. So a farm with a high clay soil like ours, the soil can't absorb that. So we get huge amounts of runoff when it does rain. Because when we're losing soil, when we're losing, it's not doing serving its purpose or wetting, because the water, because our ground is so compact, it can't take the water up. Due to the changes in the weather, we're getting huge downpours, and then most of it comes off and losing it, which is a great shame.
Last question.
I was just curious about so you talked about how this large kind of commercial farmers, so obviously they're doing very large quantity of stuff, and you're talking about bringing it down to a small scale. What's actually the range of area that a small scale farm kind of fits in?
Well, the one that's being done, the carrot grows around the corner, it's literally 2 paddocks.
Yeah.
So it's
so an acre.
oh, it's a bit bigger than that. I mean, so I don't know what hectares it is. It's a bit big. It's a few hectares, few acres of carrot grows. Now that's what we want to be looking at, because that's what Sydney depends on. It's fresh produce produced in our area. And at the moment, they are suffering terribly from drought, and they're not producing. They're not able to market price for a guaranteed crop because there's so much variability in their products across that valley that they don't know how much they're going to get. If we can wipe that out, that person then can guarantee Woolworths and Coles, the big supermarkets, demand a certain product of you. So you've got to supply that product. So you guarantee that date you will supply it. And you can supply half of it, and then you're in a huge trouble. They wiped out because you've now going to have to buy out for somebody else to supply your crop. So if we can even it out, that's what we're trying to do, even out what's done on the small scale. So that those farmers then have a chance to market their product and guarantee that close. And Sonia's floriculture is a really good example. Okay. Just take one.
Sir, stormwater collection and transportation is a big deal. Then how can we manage it?
Pardon?
So stormwater collection and transportation is a big deal.
Yeah.
Then how can we manage it?
With our stormwater, well, we have no problem at all. We don't have any. We're just not producing any.
Yeah.
But if we do, then we're fine. If we have stormwater, we have stormwater reservoirs, dams, which we store our stormwater in. And we can use that really well because we can use it on horticulture, we can use it in greenhouses, no problem with stormwater. The problem is the gap between that, once that's not available, and with less rain we're not having that problem, we then got recycled water and we have town water. And what everybody is using is town water. Potable water is being used for irrigation, which is tragic at the moment.
Sir, I have two sets of questions. The first one is GM crop is safe in use or not? Because in India, many people believe that because they're
I'm not going to get into the GM debate, partly because I'm not a biochemist, I'm a chemist, and it's a shame my boss wasn't here, she could go on for a long time about it.
And the second one is in northern India, especially the states like Punjab and UP. This is happening few days back. That people set fire their crop recipe, that the stubble cause the least CO2 concentration increase in the amount of pollution increases. So how Australians deal with their crop recipe?
What with the
Stubble. How Australians deal with their stubble problem?
stubble? We just leave it.
But India set fire.
We don't burn anymore. We don't, as far as possible, with regenerative agriculture, leave it in the ground. Yeah, we don't turn it over either.
But
we don't do tillage. We plant into the crop again. So we choose the crop and plant into the area without having to till them out, leaving the stubble to rot on the ground.
So, but it takes time, sir.
Oh, it takes time. Yeah. But at the end, if you intercrop with three things which will grow at different times of the year, you don't have a gap. So you have three crops growing in a line together. One you've cropped, then the next one will come through anyway because it's time to grow. So you're growing winter oats, wheat if you want, or whatever you're growing it in a cycle throughout the year. You cut the one crop, and the next one continues to grow. So you've killed off one, it dies in the ground, then your next crop will come through without having to till the ground. That's how I
So when protected farming is so is government providing any incentives like it's very
They are, well, we're looking for it. Because the aerotropolis, that's the new airport is going into Western Sydney, there will be incentives for goods.
yeah, that is the question. Is there any conflict between like farmers want to change the land use pattern? They want to sell the land and just build a area with the
Well, as I was mentioning to the speaker yesterday, one of our big problems is there's nothing to stop you growing anything you want on your land. And so, for instance, the people are buying up water licenses in an area called Murrumbidgee and turning all over almonds and walnuts on a scale you wouldn't believe. We're going to become the biggest almond producer. Why? And that requires huge amounts of water. Just because they can. Because Australia is so vast, and agricultural land is so wide, we can grow anything between the tropics down to Tasmania, which is way subtropical. So we can grow anything, and because you can do it, they will do it. We have two genetic modifications allowed. That's on soybeans and cotton. Yeah, those two are allowed to be genetically modified. Food, as you can see, other than soybeans, is not allowed to be.
from a very intense session. We will just do some activities. So you need to follow me what I am doing and just like put your pen down and I will be doing some steps. You need to just follow what I am doing. So first is just to bring you back. So, we started our morning discussion about sustainability, and now we are looking at how, like, entire world is looking at sustainability and to bring it into the action. So, sustainable development goals have been decided. So, we will just touch upon how this has emerged and what do we mean by deciding by these goals. So we will be starting with, like, the journey began with the Millennium Development Goals, where in year 2000 everyone was looking at how we should define our development goals. So these were 8 goals which was decided by entire world, and everyone said that we will stick on this goal and try to achieve these goals. So these 8 goals: eradicate poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality, reduce child. Like, if you see our morning wish list, it quite matches with this, what even world is looking at. So these were 8 goals which was decided by 189 nations in year 2000, and it was 15 years timeline where each country decided to achieve these goals. And then in 2015 these were reviewed and lesson learned were shared by each country, how much we have achieved and what can be done for further after achieving these goals. So looking at too many, like, people felt that these goals were decided by a small group. So there was a lot of criticism on these goals. And also, if you can look at the progress in India on these goals. So there are different colors. If you see red, it means we were slow on achieving those goals. And if it is orange, it means it was moderate. And if it is green, it is we were on track. So if you look at the first goal, there is a green as well as there is a red. So if you look at, we have achieved only four goals at a level where it is satisfactory. So looking at this, in 2015 it was decided to introduce sustainable development goals, because by that time we felt that alone development cannot be like, we cannot achieve what we are looking at, like balancing environment and development is important. So sustainability was accepted by entire world, and then sustainable development goals have been decided, which is 2030. The target is to achieve these goals by 2030. So there are 17 goals, 169 targets and some 232 indicators to actually track the progress. So these are 17 goals which we have standing outside. So each country is now working on these goals. So you will also hear in your newspaper and media reports like how are we working on this. So here we are looking at SDG 6, which is looking at clean water and sanitation. So after that, the field visits and everything which you will be looking at. So we need to look at from this lens, like how is this as per the sustainable development goals, what are the challenges, how as a youth we can look at bringing our thinking, our ideas, our innovation into it. So look, just to summarize this,
TWIG, This Week in Global Health. This week, TWIG talks about Sustainable Development Goals. You must have heard a lot of talk about the new global goals or the Sustainable Development Goals or the SDGs. But what exactly are these Sustainable Development Goals? Sustainable Development Goals or the SDGs are the goals that replace the Millennium Development Goals or the MDGs as the post-2015 internationally accepted goals for development. To refresh your memory, MDGs, or the Millennium Development Goals, were the 8 goals that were established in the year 2000.
So it will be like the power supply will be resuming. Two minutes break. So what we are doing is breaking for lunch, early break, and we will come back by 1:30. So, and we will finish this film, and then we have a session by Dr. Michelle, and then we will continue our session. So, are you okay? Because it is almost like 12:45. So we come back at 1:30. Okay? Thank you.